The Warren-Matson debate. Dr. Thomas B. Warren, Ph.D., is professor of the philosophy of religion and Christian apologetics at the Harding Graduate School in Memphis, Tennessee. Dr. Wallace I. Matson, Ph.D., is professor of philosophy at the University of California at Berkeley. This debate was held at the Curtis-Hixson Convention Hall in Tampa, Florida, on September the 11th through the 14th, 1978. We present the Warren-Matson debate on the existence of God. The propositions for this debate are as follows. The first proposition reads, I know that God, that is, the God in the New Testament, who is to punish some individuals eternally in hell, does not exist. Dr. Wallace I. Matson is in the affirmative, and Dr. Thomas B. Warren is in the negative of this proposition. The second proposition reads, I know that God, that is, the God of the New Testament, who is to punish some individuals eternally in hell, does exist. Dr. Thomas B. Warren is in the affirmative, and Dr. Wallace I. Matson is in the negative of this proposition. This production was directed and videotaped by Dr. Rex A. Turner, Jr., and by Dr. Curtis A. Cates, administrators and professors of the Alabama Christian School of Religion, Montgomery, Alabama. This film has been copyrighted and reproduced by the National Christian Press, Incorporated. Any reproductions, use, or sale of this film without written permission from the authorized representative of the National Christian Press is strictly prohibited.
I don't like to be captious, but I think that these debates in subsequent evenings would get on better if Dr. Warren would bring us fewer charts and more attention to the argument. He is very eager to get on to the questions of evolution and how an atheist can claim that anything is wrong, which I am perfectly willing to discuss. But as he has also insisted, these are my two nights to have the affirmative and to present my own case. And it seems to me that he ought to grant me the courtesy of letting me present this case and not continually complain about my not talking about everything all at once. I will, Dr. Warren. We have 4 nights, and I'm not going to let you go away disappointed. I think I'll be able to deal with everything you're saying in those 4 nights, and if not, I will most certainly do it in person or by correspondence, if you so desire. I have to put in a denial about my admission that my case is fallen and so on and so forth. I did, I think, present some arguments a few minutes ago. There was very little attention paid to those, you will have noticed, in what was just said. Perhaps Dr. Warren would like to think them over a while, or perhaps he wants them to be produced a little more slowly. Well, I'm quite willing to oblige. He did say, in regard to my first one, namely that I can't be punished after I'm dead because I'm gone and won't be there. Seems to me a rather good argument, but maybe not. He did say that I missed the whole point because it's the soul that matters and not the body. Well, let's see. I'd like to give this argument, if you like, in slow motion. So let me try to do that. After I die, my body will be burnt up or fed to the dogs or left in a coffin to decompose or something of this sort. In any event, it will, after more or less time, cease to be identifiable any longer as my body. Well, I mean, maybe not. Maybe I'll be preserved in rum or mummified or deep frozen. But I think we can disregard those possibilities, since any theory of the afterlife that worked only for them couldn't be of much interest to us. I mean, unless your theory of the afterlife works for decomposed bodies, then there's no use bringing it up. Well, but what will probably be said at this point, and I think Dr. Warren already did say it, is that, yeah, the body will decompose, but God can resurrect it. And indeed, Jesus and St. Paul expressly tell us that he does this. Rather briefly, though, well, the subject was considered with great care, as all religious questions were, by St. Thomas Aquinas. And he pointed out in his conclusion on the subject that no matter how thoroughly dispersed the ingredients may be that made up my body while I'm alive, God, who is all-knowing and all-powerful, can keep track of them and reassemble them. He says, I quote the saint directly, in the twinkling of an eye, end quote. Well, I'm not going to deny this. I'm not going to deny that omnipotence can do anything that's conceivable. And that reassembly job, I admit, is conceivable. What I deny, though, is that the reassembled body, even out of the original ingredients, would be me. It would be a replica of me, indistinguishable to sight from me. And I'll even allow, with all my present brain traces and all my memories, so that this replica never doubted that it was Matson. But that's not good enough. Well, why not? Well, look at it from my present point of view. I admit that God could make a perfect replica of me after I die. Well, but if he can do that, he could also make a perfect replica of me right now while I'm alive. Or, if you like, 17 of them. Or, cloning and all that. But we'll suppose that God does it by supernatural means, out of nothing, if you like. Not only could this be done, but it's at least an abstract possibility for all I know, remember the universal negatives, that there may be such unfortunate beings scattered around the galaxies right now. Perfect replicas of me who think they're Matson, who are maybe making talks identical to this to audiences identical to this, that is, so on in the Andromeda Galaxy or wherever. That's a supposition that a science fiction writer might have fun with. Suppose I discovered, that is, knew, and even Dr. Warren admitted that I knew, that it was true, that there was such a replica somewhere. What would that be to me here and now? It would be an interesting, an astounding, if you like, piece of information. Nothing more. The distinction would still remain between me and them. I couldn't feel their pain. And they couldn't be justly punished for my transgressions. It doesn't matter how they might fool everybody by looking like me and thinking that they were me and so on. They wouldn't really be me. I hope that's quite clear. That's right here and now. All right, I say. God can make a replica of me out of whatever materials are lying about or out of nothing. But no such replica is me. Now, I don't think that anyone would deny this if he thought it over. That is, he wouldn't deny it if the materials that constitute this replica are different from the materials that constitute or constituted me. Remember, I'm just talking about the body now. I'll come to the soul in a moment. Don't be impatient. But now, suppose that instead of making this replica out of, so to speak, the goods in the warehouse, God very carefully, as in St. Thomas Aquinas, God very carefully gathers up all the fragments that once were in me and makes a new so-called me out of them. Just those and no others. Does that alter the case? Well, St. Thomas says it does. And indeed, he claims that for the resurrection of the body that God promises, this must indeed happen. I hate to disagree with such an eminent authority, but on this matter, I'm afraid I must. And I'll try to persuade you that one must disagree with him by the following means. Suppose I somehow know right now that a year after I die, some replica of me made of foreign materials will be burned at the stake. I'll be sorry to hear this, but it won't terrify me the way it would terrify me if I knew that a year from now, I'm not going to die, but keep right on living, and in 365 days I'm going to be burned at the stake. And I don't think it would you if you think it over. Because, why is this? Well, it's because once I'm dead, it makes no difference to me what happens to this matter that composes me now. It doesn't make any difference whether it's incinerated or eaten or left to decompose or whatnot. It's just like my hair cuttings and fingernail parings. Now, I'm well aware that there have been and are tribes that think it makes a great deal of difference what happens to their hair cuttings and fingernail parings, but I assume that it doesn't to anyone in this audience. Well, I say everything in the body is the same way. When we are through with it, that's the end of our interest in it. If the meat that I am now becomes a hyacinth or a rose or a bung stopper, what of it? I'm sorry to talk about such gruesome subjects, and I know lots of people do set great store on waterproof mausoleums and all that, but I must be frank here. I say, if a replica of me is made out of different material, it doesn't interest me. Well, I say, in the special case when the replica is made of my reconstituted fragments, that doesn't either. Why not? The case is no different. Continuity has been lost. That thing is an imposter. It's not me. I cease to exist. And having ceased to exist, I can't come back at all. Though a replica of me, I admit, can. All right, so much for the body. If it convinces you, fine. If it doesn't, I'll have to rely on my second argument. But now let me go on to the soul. Dr. Warren says that I missed the point. Because I am not a body, or at any rate, I'm not just a body. I am a soul, or at any rate, the most important part of me is the soul. And this soul is what God is going to punish eternally in hell. And it survives death. So continuity isn't lost. Well, my full reply to that would take us deep into what philosophers call the mind-body problem, on which I have recently published a book, plug, plug. Right now, I'll just summarize my conclusions, somewhat dogmatically perhaps, and leave it to subsequent discussion with Dr. Warren to clear up obscurities, if any. That is, if Dr. Warren sees fit to discuss my argument at all. I hope he will. To be brief about it, I would say that this objection fails. That is, the objection that the book doesn't matter about the body because the soul will still be there. This fails because, at least with respect to what is dealt with in the matter of punishing and so on, the soul is identified with a person's conscience, sentience, feeling, awareness, or whatever it is that we've got going when we're awake and that shut down when we go to sleep. And what I claim is that this consciousness, this sentience, this awareness, is not a thing over and above and in addition to the body. It's not an extra body, sort of spiritual kidney, not even an immaterial extra organ. What is this consciousness? It just is the functioning of the body, or more particularly, the functioning of the central nervous system. I didn't make this up, of course. The view I'm here expressing goes back to Aristotle and beyond. But it seems to me that modern science and philosophy leave no reasonable doubt about its adequacy and indeed truth. So to survive, suppose that the functioning of my body can go on when the body has been destroyed, that's to make a mistake, like that of supposing that the melody can go on after the fiddle has been smashed, or the digestion can continue after the stomach, etc., have been all messed up. Moreover, another point, to take this from the philosopher Hume, suppose for a moment that what I just said isn't right. Suppose that thoughts, feelings, and so on can exist, or even do exist, so to speak, disembodied, just floating. That they can exist independently of a thinking, feeling, so on body. Even so, as Hume pointed out, there could be no way in which what he calls the bundles of these thoughts and so thoughts, etc., could be identified as being my thoughts, feelings, and so on, as distinct from yours. There's no, that is, principle of identity that ties them all together and makes this my feeling as distinguished from your feeling if our bodies are gone. What makes my thoughts is that they're the thoughts associated with my body. And when that's gone, no way of identifying them. The tag is lost. So, even on this hypothesis, namely the hypothesis that contrary to what I assert to be the case, there can be feelings independent of the body, all that God could do in the way of punishment after death would be to create an eternal, say, burning sensation. God would say, let there be an eternal burning sensation. If he could do that, which I deny, he could, I suppose, associate that eternal burning sensation with an eternal, I used to be Matson belief. And so there is this sensation, which is a sensation of extreme discomfort that lasts eternally, and which is also somehow blended with the feeling, oh, Lordy, I used to be Matson, and now I'm getting it. Well, all right. On this hypothesis, I suppose that might be done. But that would be utterly pointless cruelty, since it wouldn't in fact be Matson. It would be God being deceptive. And I'm sure Dr. Warren would not want to adhere to that blasphemy. Nor is that, please note this, nor is that possibility something that can frighten me here now. Not because I'm particularly brave, but because one of the things I happen to know right here and now is that that sort of thing, if it existed, wouldn't be me. It would be like the replica of me in the Andromeda Galaxy. All right. That's what I had to say about that argument. I suppose I'd better go on now to say something about the second argument, although I'm afraid this may be going a little too fast for Dr. Warren. I had planned to reserve this, but let me see if I can say something about it. The second argument, remember, is this, that Dr. Warren's God, the God who is at one and the same time both perfectly powerful, knowing, and good, and also punishes souls eternally in hell, cannot exist, because that description contains a self-contradiction, namely the contradiction between being good and inflicting eternal torment on some sentient creature. Why do I say that's a contradiction? Well, isn't it? I mean, don't you see it? Let those who have eyes see, or those who have ears hear. But maybe I'd better all I can do is, so to speak, try to dress this up rhetorically a little bit, and that's what I will try to do. Maybe I should begin by repeating. I think I've already made this point, but for Dr. Warren's benefit at least, I will repeat it. That this is a distinct argument from that I considered in the chapter on evil in my book, which I think Dr. Warren assumes that more of you have read than probably really have. Though I dare say that before the week is out, we will get substantially all of it in his charts. So you will have read it before you leave, if you're faithful in your attendance. The argument I used in my book was the traditional argument, which goes back at least to the philosopher Epicurus, that of the three traditional attributes of God, namely his perfect knowledge, his perfect power, and his perfect goodness, it's only possible, compatibly with the evil that exists in the world, for him to have two of them. Because if he is perfectly powerful and good, and evil exists, it must be because God doesn't know that it exists, in which case he isn't perfectly knowing. Or if he's perfectly good and perfectly knowing and evil exists, it must exist because he can't prevent it. And then he's not all powerful. Well, if he is perfectly powerful, can do anything he wants, and perfectly knowing, knows everything that's going on, and evil exists, it must be because he doesn't want to prevent it, and consequently isn't good. A very simple, in my opinion, conclusive argument. In fact, the only philosophical argument I know that I think I would award the title conclusive to, at least in my more skeptical moments, I think of that. I know Dr. Warren has written a whole book in reply to this argument, and I suppose we will discuss it in due time. That, however, is not the argument I am presenting now. And I want to make this clear. My argument is a distinct argument. It's true that I said about that argument that, well, I don't know, maybe you can drive a wedge in somewhere. Though I didn't mean by that to give up the case, as Dr. Warren says I did. I just admit that I'm a fallible human being. I'm not the Pope. This argument is that a perfectly good, or indeed being that wasn't even just imperfectly good or good at all, could not will and carry out his will to inflict eternal torment on any sentient being, however wicked that was, because that's just the maximum of atrocity, the maximum of evil. Now, Dr. Warren talks about God's justice in this connection. Well, I haven't time now to go into that, but I will. Right now, I'm simply presenting the argument. I will try to deal with objections to it tomorrow night. Why is that? Well, for one thing, the eternity of it. To be sure, Dr. Warren tried to work a certain kind of philosophical ploy on me that's called, in ancient logic, heat. That is, to ask, well, would 1 minute of punishment post-mortem be just? And if two, and so on. The idea is that where are you going to draw the line? If you admit that any punishment is okay, then you have to say that an infinite amount is. Well, I didn't fall for that. Nevertheless, I would say this. Granting, which I don't, but granting for the sake of argument, that some amount of punishment might be just for sins. I repeat, I do not grant this. I'm just saying this for the sake of argument. Everybody's moral intuition is that the punishment ought to fit the crime. But nobody, not even Hitler, not even Stalin, has done anything for which the only appropriate punishment is an eternity of being burned at the stake. Granted, maybe being burned at the stake once. Granted, maybe being burned at the stake 100 times. You do come to something. Say, after all, Dr. Warren brought up the Old Testament, I didn't. The eye for an eye, the tooth for the tooth. If Hitler had suffered 6 million deaths, you ought to stop there. And indeed, that's where I will stop for tonight.
moderators, ladies and gentlemen. It's a real pleasure to me to be back before you for the third speech of the evening, a reply to the speech to which you've just listened. I want to call attention first to Dr. Matson's statement. He says Dr. Warren did not apparently listen to my speech very well, for he didn't answer it. I think you know better than that without my having to point it out to you, but let me just indicate that I did give a list of some 14 blunders, including a discussion of the only two things that he claimed to be arguments. Now, I do not know how one could reply to a speech any more than that, Dr. Matson. Perhaps you were not listening when I was replying to your speech. He said, Dr. Warren ought to grant me the opportunity to present my own case. Dr. Matson, that's what I've been pleading for you to do. I'm not only willing for you to do it, I'm pleading for you to do it. I'm doing all I possibly can to get you to do it. At the same time, I want you to recognize that as the negative speaker in this discussion, I have not only the right but the obligation to show you wherein you are failing, to show you what is involved in the affirmation you have made. You have affirmed a proposition that says, I know that God, that is the God of the Bible, does not exist. You have not really given one rational argument to that effect. You have given assertion, you have given subjective feeling, in the midst of your having already admitted in your book that for all you know, the infinite good God may exist and may, for all you know, have created God. So you see, in that admission, in his book, The Existence of God, there is no difference between us. There is the very interesting thing in this debate that we have an alleged atheist and I now reduced not to talking really about the existence of God, but whether God can be good and punish man who is wicked. Do you see that? Do you see it, Dr. Matson? Do you see that you have admitted that for all you know, the infinite good God may exist? That if God is good, for all you know, he may exist. And that for all you know, he may have created man. That man may not be here by evolution. So the only question before us really has reduced itself to this. Can this infinite good God, whom Dr. Matson admits that for all he knows may exist, can he still be good and punish? Even for one moment. How much did he say about the array of charts? He promised he was going to get to them. Dr. Matson, at the rate you're going, you could be here next year and you wouldn't be to them. What did he say about my questions as to how he decided what is evil? What is pointless suffering is over against pointed suffering, or suffering that has some point. And upon what ground do you decide what a possible infinite good God could or could not do by way of punishing a man who is in infinite rebellion? Which platform are you standing on, Dr. Matson, standing off out here observing the infinite good God and deciding that he cannot punish? Let me ask you this. Could God punish man during this earth? During his life on earth? Could he give him even that much of a slap of a wrist? Suppose man does, as you have done here, in effect, stand up and blaspheme God and said you are grotesquely monstrous. Would it be commensurate with the goodness of God for him to punish you in some way? At least to rebuke you, to say, Wallace, you're doing the wrong thing? Would that be wrong? Would that mean that God then was no longer good, just because he said you're not doing the right thing? Is a parent wicked because he punishes his child? A parent punishes his child because he loves him. I have 3 children, dear to me, I think, than life itself. I punished all of them, not because I didn't love them, but because I did. I have seen parents who claim to love their children and let them grow up in disobedience. I've seen children spit in the face of their parents and slap them and kick them, and they did nothing. That was not an act of love. It is an act of love that God says sin is terrible. There is this deterrent element of the punishment of God: do not sin. And God said to man when he put him in the garden, of every tree of the garden thou mayest freely eat, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil thou shalt not eat of it, for in the day that thou eatest thereof thou shalt surely die. There was God Almighty's effort to deter man from sin. And throughout the Word of God, there is that effort to keep man from sinning, to keep him from doing wrong, to try to get him to do right. It is the ideal or intentional will of God that no one should ever sin one time. In 1 John chapter 2 and verse 1, the Bible says, My little children, these things write I unto you, that you may not sin. There is the ideal or intentional will of God. But what then if man does sin, and he has? All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, Romans 3:23. John goes on in 1 John 2:1. But if any man sin, we have an advocate, Jesus Christ the righteous. You see, there is then the will of God in the circumstance of our sin. And down through the long ages of the Old Testament, God is saying this, Christ is coming. Christ is coming. There is a way out of your sin. In spite of the fact that Dr. Wallace-Matson stands here tonight and in effect spits upon the way of God, God still loves him. He still gave his Son to die for him. He still wants him to be saved. God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth on him should not perish, but have everlasting life. The will of God in the circumstance is that you respond to him in trust, in belief, in love, and obedience, and that you can then be saved by the power of the blood of his Son, by which sin can be washed away, Ephesians 1 and 7. Now, we as human beings, because we are free, can defeat the ideal will of God. We can fall into sin. And we can defeat the intentional or the circumstantial will of God in that even after we have fallen into sin, we can reject God's appeal by the gift of his Son. That's what this world, the sun, the moon, and the stars, and human life is all about, our response to God Almighty. But you cannot defeat the ultimate will of God, which Dr. Matson himself read tonight from Matthew 25:46, when in the judgment, that great and awful day when all of us shall be there, and there is the great division between the righteous and the wicked, those who responded to God and those who have not, those on the right hand will hear the words, Well done, good and faithful servant, enter thou into the joys of thy Lord. Not all the forces of evil will be able to prevent God from saving every one of them. Nor all the forces of evil can prevent God from punishing forever those who are wicked. These shall go away into eternal punishment. God Almighty can be defeated at his ideal or intentional will, his circumstantial will, but not his ultimate will. Now, Dr. Matson has said nothing whatever other than his own subjective assertion in regard to that. I want to bring before you again the fact that he has admitted that for all he knows, the infinite God who is good exists. But he says if he punishes anybody one moment of time for anything, no matter how heinous or rebellious, then he is wicked. Would God be wicked, Dr. Matson, if he punished Adolf Hitler for one moment? Would he? Would you answer that for one moment? Would God be wicked if he punished Hitler for one moment?
Hitler is dead.
Would he be guilty of wrongdoing if he punished Hitler during his lifetime for one moment?
Yes, because he's Hitler's creator, among other things.
He would be wicked if he punished him. Would men be wicked if they punished Hitler and all of his cohorts for what they did to the Jews?
No.
No, it's right for man to do it and not God to do it. You see, when you're wedded to a viewpoint and you're determined to hold to it, then you will take this kind of absurd position. Now, let me see what I may have yet seen. I want to go now to his contention about the body. He says, what I deny is the reassembled body would be me. I want to read from 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 35 to 38. And I submit to you that there is no way in this world known to Wallace-Matson or anybody else that this isn't true. But now he has staked his case on this. He has said, for all I know, a good, infinite God may exist and may have been the creator of man. Now he comes along and says, even though he may have created man, he could not have resurrected, or he could not resurrect his body. But let us see. But some will say, how are the dead raised, and with what manner of body do they come? Thou foolish one, that which thou sowest is not quickened except it die. And that which thou sowest not the body that shall be, but a bare grain. It may chance of wheat or some other kind, but God giveth it a body even as it pleased him, and to each a body of its own. Now, if the God of heaven could create man, to bring the world into being from nothing, and create man, which Dr. Wallace-Matson has admitted may be the case for all he knows, then certainly he could resurrect man. Besides that, surely, Dr. Matson, as you think about the continuity of your own self as a unique center of personality, you are aware of the fact that your physical body changes, that it changes completely, as I recall, every 7 years. And so figure how many years you've been living, how many times your body must have changed. Are you still Wallace-Matson? It's not any longer you, I suppose. Let us look at 2 Peter chapter 1, verses 13 and 14. Well, I wonder who it is over here to my left. His body's changed, so it's not him any longer. At any rate, he's debating the proposition that Wallace-Matson signed. And I think it right, as long as I'm in this tabernacle, to stir you up by putting you in remembrance, knowing that the putting off of my tabernacle cometh swiftly, even as our Lord Jesus Christ signified unto me. There is, of course, the sense in which I am involved in my body. There's also the sense clearly taught in the Bible. This is a biblical viewpoint. We're talking about the God of the Bible. I live in my body. My body is an instrument of my mind. I move that finger by thinking. My body is my instrument. I either work and serve God or I work against him by my body. My body changes physically, but still there is a continuity of identity. And the Bible makes clear that when we die, we put off the physical body. The soul continues to live. It will be in a place waiting for the resurrection in which the body will be resurrected, changed, and reunited with the Spirit, and then all men will be gathered before God in judgment. Friends, certainly if God can create, as Dr. Wallace has admitted, then certainly he can resurrect the body. And that answers everything he said along that line, everything he said by way of claiming to have made an argument that involves a contradiction in regard to the concept of God has been nothing but a mere assertion. It is not a real rational argument, and his point that at death we cease to exist and God cannot be perfectly good and punish for the reason that he's a creator, but man can punish because he's not man's creator, simply is absurd and makes no sense whatever. Apparently he holds that men can punish and be good, but if God punishes, it's wrong. He's not made one rational argument against a good, infinite God. I want you to note that. He has admitted the possibility that the good, infinite God exists and may be the creator of man. He has not made one rational argument, not even an attempt to make a rational argument against a good, infinite God, but assumes that if God punishes, he is not good. All right, now let's look at the chart on evil. Chart number 36C. Dr. Matson, I'd like you to give attention to this, if you would, please, sir. I want to show you the basic logical thrust of what he tries to do in regard to the problem of evil. Here's the concept of God as infinite. By deduction from that, he goes to the concept of the world God would have created if he existed. Then he observes the existing world. Evil exists. He holds in his argument the world is not perfect. Now, he hasn't really argued that tonight. He's gone almost totally and completely to the concept of punishment. But in his book, he argues about the world not being perfect. Well, let us add then, if we suppose, another circle out here and make it punishment. I'll put a P there for punishment. So this becomes the combined evidence. He then observes this, forming concepts and drawing conclusions. By deduction, he then concludes that God does not exist. Now, that's the closest that he has come to really giving us anything at all, and he didn't do that. I have formulated it for him. Now let's look at 36E. If an infinite and perfect being exists, then whatever else exists must be compatible with his will. Only the existence of perfection is compatible with the will of a perfect being. The world is not perfect, therefore an infinite and perfect being does not exist. All right? 36E1. Now, Dr. Matson's argument is not really complete as he has given it, and he will pardon me if I go into it just a bit more to make clear exactly what he is saying. If God exists, and if the world exists, then the world exists if the world exists, if that is the world is compatible with God's will. If the world exists and is compatible with God's will, then if the world is perfect, that is, it is good with no evil whatever. And he will include punishment in that. Now I'm adding to that, and you'll see that what I'm adding are the things, the propositions in brackets. 2A, I'm calling that because it really is a sort of an embellishment or adding what he needs in the second proposition. If evil exists and the world is not perfect, he doesn't say that in his argument. Secondly, he will assert that evil does exist. That would have to be there for his argument to be worth anything. Third, therefore, the world is not perfect. Propositions 2A, 2B, by modus ponens argument. Therefore, we have two more, or the need for several more arguments or propositions in addition to that. It is false that both the world exists and the world is compatible with God's will. 2 and 3 by modus ponens. 3B, either it is false that the world exists, or it is false that the world is compatible with God's will. 3A by De Morgan's theorem. Third, the world exists. 3C. 3D, it is false that the world is compatible with God's will. Propositions 3B, 3C by disjunctive syllogism. 3E, it is false that if the world exists, then it is compatible with God's will. A conjunction is true only when all of the conjuncts are true. One is false. Here, proposition 3C. 4, therefore, it is false that God exists. Conclusion drawn by the atheist Dr. Matson. Now notice carefully. As the atheist admits, any argument which has even one false premise is of no force at all, as he says in his book, The Existence of God, page number 131. In the above argument, as the atheist uses the expression involved, at least the following propositions are false. 2, 2A, 3, 3A, 3B, 3D, 3E, and 4. For the purpose of this discussion will be sufficient to show that the atheist's argument from evil is of no force at all, to show that propositions 2A and 3 are false, and I have done it. And I've also applied to the only other thing he had to say on that in regard to punishment. Let me, in the moment closing, say something about his questions, and I'm afraid I left them over there. The answers that he gave to my questions. In question number 5, I asked him, in torturing and or murdering 6 million Jews, the Nazis were guilty of violating, please check all appropriate boxes. If you'll put that up on the board, 86B, please, up on the screen. The law of Germany, the law of the United States, the law of England, the law of God, some of the law explained, or no law at all. Now, I want you to note right here in chart number, or question number 5, he checked no law at all. And then parenthetically, he explains, but I don't claim to be a lawyer. Dr. Matson, you don't have to be a lawyer to know that you do wrong when you break laws. How do you do wrong without breaking law? How do you do wrong without there being some objective standard? The Bible teaches sin is a transgression of the law. The truth of the matter is, he does not face up to the fact that to say that it was merely the law, some human law, is to throw himself into sheer subjectivity. And if that's the case, one person's idea is just as good as another. He wants to hold on to objectivity while he holds to atheism, and the two are simply incompatible. Talk about punishment and God and the goodness of God being incompatible. Atheism and objective morality are the things that are incompatible. The counter element of my response to evil, as I shall show you, the Lord willing, either in the next speech or tomorrow evening, will be to show that it is the atheism that's involved in logical contradiction and not theism. Thank you very much. We'll hear Dr. Matson now for the 5-minute rejoinder.
I think that basically what's happened is that Dr. Warren thought he had the gift of prophecy. That is to say, he thought that I would come here and regurgitate my book. And so he's been reading up on that and typing it out for display on this gadget and so on, and he continually talks about that and doesn't address the arguments that I am actually presenting. Well, that's his problem and not mine, and I will talk about the arguments of my book in my own good time if I choose to. I'm not really required to respond to non-responsive remarks. I must protest, though. I really think, Dr. Warren, that in a conversation of this sort, it is in violation of the spirit of the rules that I think are tacitly agreed upon to invoke what is called the odium theologicum. That is, not to rest content with pointing out my logical blunders or factual howlers or so on, but to do, as you have repeatedly done, accuse me of standing here and blaspheming. I ought to be a king's X on that, since you did invite me to discuss the question of the existence of God. And I, to pious Christians, anyone who questions this, much less denies it, is ipso facto guilty of blasphemy. With that admission, could we hear no more about that? He has several times referred to my expression grotesque monstrosity about God. I said he was a grotesque logical monstrosity, that is to say, a self-contradictory being, a chimera. I don't think that, in the sense intended, that is to be counted among my blasphemies. There are many interesting matters that Dr. Warren has brought up, which I will try to reply to from time to time, certainly not in the less than 3 minutes that I have now. I think it's quite clear to anyone who listens candidly that Dr. Warren had nothing to say in reply to my argument about the discontinuity of the body, nor did he have anything to say about the spirit except flatly to assert that it does continue after death, and he did not meet what I think most impartial referees would regard as an argument to the contrary. He brings up again and again my alleged concession that a perfect God may exist and may have created man, and then tries to turn that into my giving up on the whole thing, which is only reference, I repeat, and I hope that this will be for the last time because it's really very tiresome. I repeat that that was only a modest assertion of my own fallibility. Now, as for the rest, I haven't time really to go into the matter of God's punishment of the wicked. I think since Dr. Warren has addressed a number of rhetorical questions to me, I'll simply close with one to him. He did say that he loves his children and he has punished them. With a blowtorch in the face, Dr. Warren, and for 1 second, for 1 minute, for 10 minutes, for an hour.
I'm glad to be here for the last speech of this evening. I was rather surprised when Dr. Matson stopped. He certainly didn't take the 5 minutes that was assigned to him. Our timekeeping was correct, so it rather surprised me when he stopped so abruptly. But I want to say that if he feels that I have wronged him in any way in my statement in regard to his speaking blasphemy, I want to say that I'm sorry, though I do want to say that in my viewpoint, Dr. Matson, it is blasphemy for one to call God grotesque and monstrous, even if you do append the adjective logical. So I have the right, I suppose, to my viewpoint as well as yours. And if you continue to make that kind of statement, I shall continue to respond to it. He said Dr. Warren had nothing to say about his argument on the discontinuity of the body other than mere assertion. That simply is not true. I made clear that given his admission, and he said he's tired of hearing about it, but until you take it back, Dr. Matson, you shall hear more about it. Now, if you would like to take it back and say it's not true, you don't just write things in books being facetious or playing games by writing things like, for all I know, the infinite God may exist. If surely you're not saying that that's what you were doing when you wrote that, or that you were somehow or other just trying to give a modest statement. Were you trying to give a modest statement when you really didn't believe you were being modest? Are you saying you didn't mean the statement? Now, you either meant it or you didn't, so if you will make clear to us that you really mean it, then you see we can go back and talk about that God. And then we can talk about you're either giving up your book or this proposition. You see, you tried to escape giving up the book or the proposition by saying in the book you weren't talking about the God we're talking about tonight. And so now when it's pressed upon you, you say you're tired of it, you want me to quit saying it, and you're saying that you didn't really mean it. Now, if that's the case, then we can go back to asking you which one you're going to give up, the proposition or the book. You're not going to escape quite that easily, Dr. Matson. Now let's look at question number, or chart number 68L and 68M and 68N. No, I'm sorry, I want to skip that and go on to the sixth question because I've already considered that and I want to go on to this one. True or false? If you had been a soldier during World War II, and if the Nazis, number one, had captured you, and two, had given you the choice of either joining them in their efforts to exterminate the Jews or being murdered, you would have had the objective moral obligation to die rather than to join them in the murder of Jewish men, women, and children. And he answered, it's true. Now talk about something that is self-contradictory. Here's a man who holds that we are here as a result of nothing of intelligence, nothing of life, that our origin goes back to non-living matter, which he has to know is eternal. You will notice that he has not touched that, and he will not touch it, not with a 10-foot pole. He has already admitted that life does not come from non-life, therefore atheism could not be true. And yet all of this, which has come into existence by sheer blind accident, he now says that he would have the obligation, the objective moral obligation, to die rather than to join the Nazis in their murder of the Jews. Dr. Matson, we have pleaded, we have begged, we have cajoled, we've done all we know how to do, get you to tell us why and how you would have such an obligation. If all there is to us is matter, if nothing exists but matter, why on earth would anybody give his life for anybody else? That absolutely makes no sense. A man who can see a contradiction in a good God being infinite in justice and holiness and righteousness, as well as in goodness, and then cannot see that contradiction really escapes my ability to understand. All right, thank you very much. I hope you'll be back with us tomorrow evening. We'll continue these matters.
I'd like to commend the audience for the fine way in which you have participated, or not participated, I should say. I commend Dr. Warren, Dr. Matson, pressing the issue, and I know that you'll be back tomorrow evening if you're interested in these things, and we look forward to seeing you then. There will be, for the benefit of those who've traveled long distances out of town, or members of the Church of Christ, or others who may have traveled and desire to, they will meet at the Florida Avenue Church of Christ for a gathering place to meet who is here from out of town. Dale Spung, the minister of that